Archduchess Marie Louise was a daughter of Francis II, the first Emperor of Austria. Her position made her a bargaining chip in the entangled politics of Napoleonic France, and she ended up becoming the second Mrs. Bonaparte. Here we explore how their marriage came to be, what it was like, and what happened to her after Napoleon. Join me as we explore her tale. The Archduchess Marie Louise was born on the 12th of December 1791. Her father was Archduke Francis, heir to the House of Habsburg, and with it the position of ruler of Austria and its territories in Hungary, Poland, Bohemia, and much of the Balkans, along with the office of Holy Roman Emperor, which had become a virtual hereditary title of the Habsburgs by the late 18th century. 7 months after Marie Louise's birth, her grandfather, Leopold II, died, and Francis succeeded as Francis II, ruler of one of the most powerful states in Europe. Marie Louise's mother was Maria Theresa of Naples in Sicily. She and Francis would have many children, including 2 sons who lived into the 1870s, so it was always unlikely that Marie Louise would rule over Austria. However, she was the eldest of Francis and Maria Theresa's children, and as such, she was one of the most significant royal children in Europe. Marie Louise was raised in the tradition of royal children in pre-modern times. This meant that she was placed in her own household from infancy, and largely raised by her French governess, Marie Victoire de Folliot de Creneville, and a small brigade of household staff. Her youth was spent under the pall of war across Europe. Back in 1789, the French Revolution had commenced, ultimately leading to the imprisonment of King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette, an Austrian princess who was Marie Louise's great-aunt. In defense of Marie Antoinette, Austria had gone to war with France in 1792, and would remain intermittently at war with the French for much of the next quarter of a century, generally suffering defeat after defeat at the hands of Napoleon Bonaparte, who in 1796 rose as a French general by defeating the Austrians on the Italian front of the Revolutionary Wars, and then becoming first consul in 1799 and Emperor of the French in 1804. Marie Louise's teenage years were tragic ones. In late 1805, during the War of the Third Coalition, Napoleon had won a series of devastating victories over the Austrians in Central Europe, and in mid-November seized Vienna. Marie Louise, her family, and the imperial government had fled the capital in advance, and in the weeks that followed, her father was forced to sign the latest in a series of humiliating treaties with the French, ceding new territory to Napoleon's ever-growing empire. To compound matters, in the spring of 1807, Marie Louise's mother died at just 34 years of age, owing to a premature childbirth after developing tubercular pleurisy. Finally, in the spring of 1809, Marie Louise's father and his government decided to try yet again to defeat Napoleon and the French in armed conflict, the War of the Fifth Coalition as it is known. But this ended in yet another disastrous defeat and the occupation of Vienna by the French for a second time in less than 4 years. Another disastrous peace treaty followed, one in which Austria was stripped of more territory. Yet it was not as bad as what Napoleon had done to other states. In 1807, he forced Prussia to sign the Treaty of Tilsit, depriving it of most of the eastern half of its territories, and created the Duchy of Warsaw as a French vassal state in Poland. Marie Louise was central to the negotiations, which minimized the damage to Austria in 1809. When the Treaty of Schönbrunn between France and Austria was being negotiated in 1809, Marie Louise was nearing her 18th birthday. At the same time, Napoleon was looking to divorce his wife and remarry. This was because his marriage to Josephine de Beauharnais had failed to result in any offspring, and for years Napoleon believed that he was sterile, as Josephine had 2 children from an earlier marriage. Yet, with the birth of a son by his mistress in 1806, Napoleon was now sure that he could have children. With Josephine being in her mid-40s, and with her childbearing years at an end, Napoleon had no other option but to remarry in order to secure his line. For their part, the Austrians were supportive of the marriage proposal, despite Napoleon being over twice her age. This would lead to more lenient peace terms, and cement an alliance with the French, who had repeatedly defeated the Austrians in wars over the previous decade and a half. With the basic elements of the agreement worked out, Napoleon returned to France and a few weeks later informed his first wife that he needed to divorce her. Josephine and he would remain close, but with the divorce agreed to, on the 11th of March 1810, Marie Louise and Napoleon were married by proxy. With this, Marie Louise became Empress of the French and Queen of Italy. The formal wedding in Paris took place in early April, as the 19-year-old Empress arrived to take up her position next to her 40-year-old husband. Despite their age difference, Marie Louise and Napoleon's marriage was a relatively successful one. Bonaparte was devoted to her, and became even more so when he learned in the late autumn of 1810, a year and a half after they were married, that she was pregnant. On the 20th of March 1811, the heir he had long sought arrived, when a baby boy was born. They christened him Napoleon Francois Charles Joseph, Prince Imperial of France. Marie Louise wrote to her father around this time, arguing that her husband was a misunderstood figure, and was actually a greater ruler than the Austrians have ever given him credit for being. For a time, the union also led to good relations between Paris and Vienna. While Marie Louise's marriage to Napoleon had quickly resulted in the birth of an heir, some years later there would be no empire for Prince Napoleon to succeed to. In the summer of 1812, in response to what he perceived as the stubbornness of Tsar Alexander I in refusing to impose a trade blockade on Britain, Napoleon invaded Russia, the only major power on continental Europe which he had failed to defeat entirely in the wars of the 1800s. It was a disastrous decision. His army suffered from disease and a lack of supplies as they marched through Russia, and then the Russians simply retreated from Moscow and burnt the city to the ground before leaving. As the winter set in, Alexander refused to negotiate with the French, and eventually Bonaparte had to flee back towards Poland. His armies were devastated in the process. Ironically, Napoleon had written to Marie Louise from Moscow extolling the beautiful late autumn weather there in October 1812. When he arrived back to Paris in mid-December, after a blistering carriage ride from Poland to France, he met with Marie Louise and urged her to write to her father in Vienna to impress on him the necessity of maintaining his alliance with France. The Empress did so, but in Vienna the winds had turned, and in the course of 1813, the Austrian government decided to join the new anti-French alliance. Over the next year, Napoleon's empire crumbled, as the Russians, Austrians and Prussians entered France and closed on Paris. In the spring of 1814, he abdicated. These events left Marie Louise in a tortuous position. Her husband was a leader of one side in the War of the Sixth Coalition, while her father was one of the leaders of the anti-French coalition. This divided her loyalties, while she also had to look out for the interests of her son. She was soon astonished when Napoleon was not just opposed, but exiled to the island of Elba in the Mediterranean. However, she was compensated personally with the award of the titles of Duchess of Parma, Piacenza and Guastalla in Italy. Napoleon, as is well known, returned to France from Elba in the spring of 1814 and seized power once again, before losing it in less than 3 months, after being famously defeated at the Battle of Waterloo. Thereafter he was exiled to the island of St. Helena, in the middle of the South Atlantic, thousands of kilometers from any continent. He would remain there until his death in 1821. He and Marie Louise never divorced, so she remained married to him until his death. Yet, it was a marriage in name only. They did not correspond during the 6 years he lived there. Marie Louise quickly moved on. Even before Napoleon's return to France in 1815, she had begun a relationship with Count Adam Albert von Neperg, a minor noble who was appointed by the Austrian government to ensure that Marie Louise did not attempt to join Napoleon on Elba. Von Neperg was a one-eyed war veteran who had lost his right eye early in the French Revolutionary Wars and was over 15 years her senior. Their relationship soon became sexual, much to the scandal of both French and Austrian society when it became public knowledge. After the wars ended, Marie Louise and her lover headed for Italy for her to take up her position as Duchess of Parma. There they had several children, two of which, Albertine born in 1817 and William Albert, born in 1819, would survive infancy and live long lives. However, Napoleon Jr. was not present in Italy. He remained in Vienna after his mother left for Italy, in large part so the government could ensure that he grew up as an Austrian prince, whose loyalties were to Austria, and not to France and his father's legacy. Meanwhile, in 1821, once news was received of Napoleon's death on St. Helena, Marie Louise and Count von Neperg were finally married. Marie Louise experienced a series of difficulties from the early 1820s onwards. In 1823, a daughter Mathilde, whom she had given birth to just a few months earlier, died in infancy. Then, in the early spring of 1829, her second husband died from heart failure in his mid-50s. To compound matters, she was not allowed to mourn publicly by the Austrian government, as her marriage to the Count was a morganatic marriage, meaning she was deemed to have married well below her social station. Finally, in 1832, her firstborn child, Napoleon Jr., died in Austria at just 21 years of age, having contracted pneumonia, and then tuberculosis over the previous few months. Shortly before Napoleon Jr.'s death, there were a series of uprisings throughout the numerous states into which Italy was divided in the first half of the 19th century. One of these occurred in the Duchy of Parma, and was so serious that Marie Louise and her government had to flee from the city in mid-February 1831. The revolt was eventually suppressed, and Marie Louise pardoned many of the insurrectionists. In response, the Chief Minister of Austria, Clemens von Metternich, dispatched a new Grand Chamberlain to the Italian Principality to head up the government there. His name was Charles René de Bombelle, a French nobleman who had relocated to Austria during the Napoleonic Wars. He and Marie Louise soon became romantically involved, and in February 1834 she married him. This was her third and last marriage. Marie Louise's later life was spent ruling quietly in Parma. Yet, it was a time of growing unease across the peninsula, as the nationalist sentiment which was spreading across Europe led many in Italy to call for a united country to be formed out of the disparate principalities such as Parma, and for the Austrian Habsburgs like Marie Louise to be expelled from the peninsula. In 1848 this burst forth into the first stirrings of the Risorgimento, which led to the full Italian unification in the early 1860s, though Marie Louise would not live to see the violence associated with it. In early December 1847 she became ill, and her condition deteriorated over the next week, suffering from what was possibly pleurisy. On the 17th of December she vomited and passed out, never to wake again. She was 56 years old. Her body was returned to Vienna, where she was interred in the imperial crypt as an archduchess of the House of Habsburg. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video on Empress Marie Louise. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of her life down below in the comments, and if you have any other suggestions, also be sure to leave them down below in the comments. I hope you guys are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.